Hey, Julian, you read any good books recently?
I have. I've just finished. I was going to ask you the same thing. I've just finished reading Sean Wesley's Through a Vet's Eyes.
Ha, I can go one better than that.
Oh, yeah?
I've got Sean Wensley due to come in now.
No way.
Yeah, let's get him in.
Brilliant.
Hi, I'm Mike Brampton.
And my name is Julian Ho.
Welcome to Veterinary Ramblings.
Great. Hello, Sean.
Hello.
Where are we going to start, guys? Because I want to talk about the book, but I also want to talk a little bit about Sean and his background, his journey.
Why don't we start with Dr. Sean Wensley, ex-BVA president? When were you BVA president, Sean? How long ago?
BVA president from 2015 to 2016.
And you did some great work as BVA president, because you're not quiet and demure, are you? You like to rock the boat a little bit, I think.
Do you think? I don't know. I suppose as you know, I think you probably know my primary interest is in animal welfare and animal ethics. So I guess that inevitably poses questions, and thinking about some of those questions are more uncomfortable for some than others. So yeah, I don't know that I set out to rock the boat, but I don't mind asking questions.
I think it's asking those questions that's important, isn't it? Because unless we ask the questions, and I don't want to. We're getting into your book territory. I don't want to hit on that so soon, but I think we need to ask those questions if there's any hope of getting an answer from anyone about them. But did you enjoy your year as BVA president? Sorry, for people who are just listening in from different countries, BVA is the British Veterinary Association. So the British Veterinary Association is an instrument of law and change within the profession. It's a very powerful organisation, association, that helps to shape the legalities of the veterinary world, and thus the farming world, and thus the pet owning world.
Yeah. Did I enjoy it? I did. It was hard work. It was demanding. You have a lot of, A, responsibility, and B, issues and areas to think about continually. And being the national representative body, you're not there to play out your view and version of the world. You're there to very, very faithfully gather and try to then reflect the views and opinions of others. And I think that journey is fascinating. I mean, that policy-making journey is both fascinating and can itself be obviously hard work, but to go through a process where, as we just said at the start, people are first of all willing to think about a question or an area that they feel the UK veterinary profession should have a view on, and then to come into the discussion once they've been persuaded that that's a worthwhile discussion to have from multiple angles and perspectives and backgrounds and depths of feeling, from rank indifference, why the hell are we thinking about this, through to how dare we think about this, through to something in the middle. It's just a brilliant process, and BVA, as you've probably heard from other guests, is just phenomenally set up to undertake that task through its committees and its volunteers, and your association of vet students, or the specialists, for them all to come together from across the world, from across the country, I should say, from across different parts of the profession, and to have those discussions and eventually come up with something that we sign off in a BVA council meeting, and then the policy, the media team run with it and play it out to the world. And as I say, it can be influential. Is, as you can imagine, really, it's hard work, but really, really rewarding.
So how long have you been asking these difficult ethical questions then, Sean?
It's funny when you put it like that, because I suppose it's only in later life that you realise they are probing ethical questions. So from being a young boy's interest with the occasional question. I remember being in Southport, not far from where I live, and a local chip shop had a little goldfish in a bowl in the searing sunshine, just on the windowsill. And this kind of troubled me.
That's no way to cook them at all, is it?
No.
You need a very hot. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, they'd unplug the fryer. Yeah. So I mean, so from back at that young age, I remember being kind of a bit troubled by that, and I think we probably a bit precocious, but wrote a little note to the shop and asked if they might think twice.
How old were you?
I dread to think, probably like 12 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Great, good.
And then, I was, when I was a teenager, I'd worked in a pet shop, and we were selling livestock. We sold rabbits and guinea pigs and cage birds and so on. I was quite interested in how they were faring in their sort of little cages and what sort of life they were going on to with the people that bought them. So while I was at vet school, I was able to do a short sort of summer vacation funded project. You've probably heard of U4.
This was the zebra finches, was it?
Yeah, exactly. So the University's Federation for Animal Welfare, they had this a great charity that fund animal welfare science, including for young, early career scientists and students. So I applied for this grant. I think it was in the summer of my third year, and started to explore for the first time scientifically, the first time for me, the well-being of caged zebra finches under typical pet shop conditions, as it was called. And that was then married the question asking with a sort of illumination of what animal welfare science is, quite a new science, but seeking to understand how different species perceive the world and what they need and want from their perspectives. So you're asking the animals then, well, what's life like for you in this cage, as best we can understand it.
I'm loving this stuff, Sean, but you've skipped through your whole teenage years. And
yeah, let's get back to those, because
let's get back to that.
You about the zebra finches again. But let's get back to the 12-year-old Sean looking through the pet shop window,
or working in the pet shop,
looking out of the pet shop window, thinking when are these punters going to come and buy my zebra finches?
Yeah, so I mean that was so I grew up in the northwest of England. Liverpool was my home city. Yeah, so and Liverpool's on the Sefton coast, so very, very large coastal dune system, beautiful pine woods, and that's basically where I just knocked around as a.
I think sand dunes and pine wood systems are not generally what most people would consider when you say the word Liverpool.
Well, you've got to stretch the imagination a little bit, I suppose, but it's where the Sefton coast runs from, sort of basically between Southport and Liverpool. It's that whole sort of coastline.
Yeah.
Ending in Liverpool. And we got the...
Okay. So let's get back to you working as a teenager. So you're beginning to question the morals and ethics of what you're doing working in a pet shop? Is this the best for the animal? How are the animals perceiving this?
Yeah. As I say, I suppose, I mean, some of the customer behavior was interesting. Because I was in that job with an eye on wanting to be a vet one day, lots of us, we sort of had that in mind from a fairly early age. Whereas the others I worked with weren't necessarily. So I mean, the point being, none of us had had any training. We were selling live animals to people. None of us had really had any training apart from a few pointers here and there. The people coming in, of course, didn't have to demonstrate any sort of real knowledge or awareness of what they were taking on. And some of them would be quite open. You might say, well, I saw two things actually that would spring to mind. So one is someone that comes in for, I don't know, a bag of nuts for the birds in the garden, but they've got a small child with them, and the little girl or boy sees one of the pets for sale and just instantly goes, I want one of them. And the first reaction is don't be daft. And then they say, no, I really want one of them, and start pulling at the elbow and so on and so forth. And I witnessed many times, that absolute impulse sort of purchase and decision that the parent would kind of just look at me and sort of through the side of their mouth, just hypothetically, if we did go, what would we be talking? Is it a hutch you need, or like the bowl? What? And it was quite. I was always a bit worried about that, as you can imagine. And then others who came in
a million miles away from the advice now given out by the PDSA, your main employers, for the PET acronym. But we'll get back to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the other one, sort of similar. It might originate through a similar journey, but you might say, well, if you spend you're going to get these rabbits, these guinea pigs. If you spend just a few more quid, you could have maybe a larger hutch, or you could get a run attached. So yeah, it did get me thinking. And as I say, I also wondered about, to the extent I was able to, the quality of life of the animals that were in these little cages. They were small. They didn't really have anything to do. At one stage, we were selling chipmunks, and they were what I now know to be stereotyping, which goes round and round and round and round and round the cage. The animals would get.
Which young children like, because they think, wow, look at them, they're really active, they're great, they're running around having great fun.
Yeah. And I think, as we know now, sort of understimulated and frustrated, and perhaps potentially scared as well. And some of the indiscriminate selling, you'd see some animals that had apparently formed a pair bond, some of the birds, for example, but then they are bought according to their plumage and how they look, or just more randomly than that. And so you see two animals that are closely bonded being separated. It's enough just to register a thought at the time, oh, that's a bit of a shame. But later, you're able to see that can be, that's open to scientific analysis as well of the well-being.
I guess when you were working there, not only were you young, but also the theories of animal welfare and husbandry were young, weren't they, in terms of companion animals? The world just didn't think, look at these sentient beings that they're being stressed. And I remember I worked briefly at a pet shop as well, because I wanted to be a vet, and it was a way to work with animals, wasn't it? So going back, it was then before that you decided to be a vet. What sort of age do you think you were when you thought, I'm going to be a vet?
Probably it would have been primary school.
Wow.
Exactly which age, but I mean, a general sense that you wanted to work with animals. Interestingly, the only thing I've ever really seriously considered other than a vet was a journalist, so I guess they had that kind of writing interest from a young age. But yeah, I wanted to work with animals, thinking about some of the options, the classic kind of animal rescue centre, zookeeper, biologist. But I suppose you going back to the thought that a vet would be quite nice, and you get to obviously work with animals and people and caring owners and all the rest of it. And no regrets, to be honest. I'm very happy that I did study veterinary medicine.
I'm interested. Go on, June.
I was going to say you started in Liverpool, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay. Hometown.
Yeah. I'm interested by the journalism piece, because reading your book, there are some beautifully written descriptions of the sand dunes that you've just mentioned, and the woods and the fields and the coastline around on the Formby coast, or the Sefton coastline rather. And I'm intrigued. When did you actually write those sections?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
if I may say so.
He's had a bit of practice in asking questions over the last couple of years.
The book's been a bit of a work in progress, so I've come back to it. It's been an idea for a while, and I've dipped in and out. So those parts were probably written around 2010. There we go.
So for listeners there, Julian's holding up Sean Wensley's book called Through a Vet's Eyes, which is a fabulously interesting read and is summarized there by how we can choose a better life for our animals. But before, we're going to delve into the book in more detail there, I think, because there's a lot of interesting stuff that you've written in that book, Sean. And I think we've got so many marks in the chapters that we want to delve into. And Julian's already mentioned those are mine.
I write 3 pages of notes. I never write notes. I never write notes. I never. But
so we're going
to thank you very much for allowing us to read your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to delve into that for you guys, our listeners, and delve into that in quite some detail, because there's some really good science in there. But each of the chapters has got a section that I've just alluded to, in that what Sean does in the book is he guides us into some of the more difficult moral and ethical questions around the way that we perceive and the way that we work with animals, whether that be through working with them as pets, or working with them as agricultural. How do I describe this? What's a good word for this? Well, I'm lost for words here.
Subjects,
farming, food production.
Or not actually working with them, but just getting them off the supermarket shelf and eating them.
Yeah.
And I think that's to me, that's the most impacting part of the book, the way we relate to how we choose our food.
Yeah. So my question,
that food is animal.
My question there was relating to the fact that there's some beautifully written descriptions of the coastline around Liverpool, where Sean grew up. And that's hearing him say that he wanted to be a journalist, potentially, if he wasn't going to be a vet, made me wonder when those sections were actually written. Because to me, some of them, they were written as a teenager.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's really interesting. Yeah. So I loved creative writing rather than journalism, should we say. So journalist probably came into my mind because I just enjoyed writing, and that is a writerly way to spend time. Mm-hmm. I loved creative writing at school, English, English language story writing, giving homework to write stories. That was great. But you're right. So there was sort of contemporaneous notes and passages from that time. I would say, because it was, you can form quite powerful memories as a teenager. Mm-hmm. So whilst I do draw heavily on passages and notes that were drafted at the time, I still feel in describing some of those things that, you can walk down them in your mind. You can walk down certain paths in your mind and observe and smell the same sorts of things, because it was such a powerful time. I think it's interesting because I've seen some, I think this would be classed in the literature, and I think it's mentioned on the back of the book as nature writing, and there's this genre of nature writing, isn't there? And maybe a resurgence of interest in nature writing, not least because of people reconnecting with nature during lockdowns and that sort of thing. But I've also seen some criticism of nature writing, and that some people feel it almost, well, you could be alluding to this, but then thinking, well, maybe that's not the case. As people say, well, how on earth do people have so much time to just drift around in nature and write about nature? It's such a alien concept to most lived experience. And it's true, it is true. So this picks up on that. I was able to sort of indulge in teenage memories and use it for the purpose I do in the book. But my opportunity now to get over onto Belfast Lough, which is where I live now in Northern Ireland, are far fewer, because I've got a job and a family.
Commitments.
And I still love time spent in nature, but you're right. It's...
I found it incredibly... Indulgent is a good word to use, but I found it grounding. I found that here was the sense of nature that we can all relate to, even if we've not seen those fulmars or those cormorants or that part of North Wales. We can all think about nature rambles that we've been on. and it's calming and it's nostalgic and it's quiet, and then suddenly, how many cattle are killed? How much blood? How many chickens can't walk? And then one of your statistics that I found horrific. We all know roughly how many chickens are killed and eaten each year, because it's a lot. Because most of us eat chicken many times a month, but actually, it's 1 billion or so chickens killed a year, and a lot of the chickens, the ones bred for the table, the broiler chickens, are bred to grow incredibly quickly. So I think it's about 3 months, isn't it, bred to reach full size. 3 months is no age at all. And of course, they have bone problems as a result of that. They're grown to beyond the capacity for their skeleton to keep up. But you do say that that's improving. So the lameness in broiler chickens has been reduced to just 1% from about 2% a few years back, which is fantastic. But it's still, I've got the figure here, it's still 660 million birds a year in too much pain to even stand.
And that's the global figure, isn't it?
That's the global figure. Oh, my goodness me, that is absolutely appalling. But and it's the contradistinction between you looking for those bee orchids and finding them, and the intricate beauty of the bee orchids, and then slam dunk, bam, look at these chickens that can't even walk. And so I think you've done a very clever thing there of lulling us into a false sense of security and whacking us against the head with a dead chicken, as it were. And I love it, because I think it is. That's what we need, is a wake-up call, this book. And it should be taken, I think, as a wake-up call.
What gave you the inspiration for the book, Sean? Why suddenly have you produced this book?
Well, as I say, it's been a good while in its gestation, so it wasn't a lockdown project or anything like that.
Right.
To be honest, when going back to the story of the zebra finches and that project when I was a student, as I say, it opened my eyes to the field of animal welfare science, this science of assessing how animals perceive the world and what they need and want from their perspectives. How are they faring under human stewardship? That's now open to scientific inquiry. And I thoroughly enjoyed my project for my zebra finches, but even better was when the grant recipients came together for a day, and we all had to do a little student presentation, and actually sitting there listening to the other students' projects and what they'd found just blew me away, really. And it was one of those, when I was at Liverpool, they'd recently introduced an intercalated BSc in conservation medicine. And so because of my interest in wildlife, biodiversity, I'd always thought I'd love to maybe intercalate and do this new BSc. And then sitting at that UFO meeting and hearing about the animal welfare science, I asked some of the academic researchers that were there and the supervisors, if I was to make some sort of career out of this or explore this journey, this direction, what might that look like? And they told me about a master's that was available at Edinburgh University in applied animal behaviour and animal welfare. And that, like the BSc, would have been a 1-year course, but tagged on to the end rather than in the middle. And, it was one of those times in my life when you're sort of making career decisions are really mulled, because I'd had my heart set on applying for this conservation medicine BSc. I thought that was just sort of sent from the hand of the gods, but I was really paused. So on balance, I decided to apply for the MSc instead, and that's when I started getting some interest in it. So to answer your question, the reason for that ramble is once I had studied it, you sort of learned all the science of the pain caused by castrating lambs or whatever. But equally, I had the experience of having been on the farm as a placement and done that sort of work. And I just felt there was a story to be told of trying to fundamentally wanting to relate on the science, because they're so interesting, so important. It was a science communication motivation. Could you bring it to life rather than just sort of telling people about science, could you tell it through the eyes of someone that's sort of clumsily held said lamb and done that thing at quite high pace, really, through necessity, and similarly with piglets, and then just had half a glance as you were ushered in to do something else at them tottering around, and just having half a thought, well, that surely can't be pleasant, but I don't have time to think about it right now. But yeah, it was a science communication motivation, really.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I'd said earlier, I'll get back to the zebra finches later, and this is that later, because you said, I think in chapter 1, beneath the skin, when you're looking at comparative anatomy and physiology and using that as the stepping stone, basically, under the skin, well, we're all pretty much the same. There are a few differences, but birds and beasts, we're pretty much the same. We have the same biology, so why not the same mentation to some extent? And how do you go about proving that? Because you can't run the risk from a public perception point of view of anthropomorphizing, can you? You can't try and change farmers' mentalities, and you can't try and change the government's codes of ethics and legalities based on, I think this pretty little pig's thinking this. We can't say he's looking sad, he's looking dull. So you have to do scientific experiments, scientific studies to try and prove that there is some suffering involved in the way that zebra finches are kept, in the way that pigs' tails are docked and their teeth are cut. Because also we're aware that we must preserve farming as a way of life. I think we must preserve farming as a way of life because
do we preserve it or do we conserve it?
Well, we need to change it, but ultimately, I think we need to make sure that farmers can make a living. We don't want to alienate them. We want to get them to think of our point of view, if it's the right point of view. So the first question is, do you have the right point of view? And I think the study you did on the zebra finches shows that in that case, yes, you did. And I'm not going to give any spoilers. I think that's what Michael and I are being very careful about. We don't give any spoilers to the book. But you do show that that zebra finches are, I think it's fair to say, less happy in captivity than not in captivity, by the fact that it stifles their normal behaviour. And you show that with a few other species as well, that actually caged species, even those that are born in cages and bred over several generations in cages or captivity of some sort, will, when they get the chance, exhibit the behaviour that the wild form exhibited, which must mean that caged or captive behaviour is inhibitory. And you give a lot of mention then to the 5 needs, which obviously at vet school we were taught of as the 5 freedoms. So do you want to just mention those 5 needs for that context?
Yeah, and if I could just go back a second, just to what you're saying there. So this, again, you can kind of start that set of thought processes back in the pet shop. So if we care for a society that wants to care for animals, so let's accept, even we can't take that for granted. So we've got societies that haven't even thought about it and provide a very basic level of care. But we have got a solid foundation of wanting to care for animals. But in that pet shop world and in many other places, we can view it in quite sort of physical way. Are they well fed? Are they clean? Are they given a walk once a day? That's obviously has a mental component to it. But as I described the zebra finch cages as a sort of tick box world, and a lot of, I think probably when I was a little lad, again, keeping certain pets, you'd be thinking about all those things. I've got to clean them out. I've got to make sure they've got the right food at the right time. And what I think has evolved is that it's fundamentally thinking about their mental health, their mental well-being, and how behaviour is a window on that. And what's most important, as you just mentioned, is thinking about evolutionary legacy. So all of these captive animals, even when they're domesticated over many generations. That span of domestication is just a mere blink of the evolutionary eye. They've been around as a species for eons longer than we have, and certainly than we have had a chance to modify their appearance and or behavior through domestication. So they bring that with them, and they, in the vast majority of cases, and I give several examples, would prefer to be able to express the most highly motivated parts of that behavioral repertoire in captivity. So it's not an argument to say that they need to be able to do everything that they would do in the wild. And people say, well, does that mean they have to be chased by a cheetah and all this sort of thing?
Absolutely. It's not everything bad as well as everything good, is it? But
but when some behavior is externally motivated, like fleeing in the face of a predator, other things we know are internally motivated, and it's those highly internally motivated behaviors that have evolved and not dissipated, or at least disbanded completely through domestication. It's when they can't be expressed that potentially suffering can result. So it's that evolutionary legacy. And equally, in a more positive framing, when you do allow them to be expressed, it also helps us realize the ambition of giving animals a good life, so that in the conditions of human stewardship, they not only sort of tolerate being kept and used for our benefit, but we could aspire to them enjoying it and it truly being a symbiotic relation. And probably one of the main ways that we don't achieve that at the moment is allowing them to express some of the highly motivated normal behaviors.
Interesting. Descartes has got a lot to answer for, hasn't he?
Descartes, yeah. I mean, we've had some pretty challenging times on this front. But I mentioned, it's fascinating to think about that history as well. I mentioned Pythagoras, going way back.
Yes.
He would dwell on the right way to treat non-human animals. But that sort of concern has waxed and waned over history. And hopefully now that we do have this scientific backing, perhaps it'll be anchored as a concern for a bit longer than it has been previously, and less vulnerable to waning again.
Mm-hmm. I hope so. I think it would be so much of a mistake to go back in many ways. And I guess what does going back mean? Because again, you give a lot of examples of times and situations we've perhaps got things wrong. We've caused animal suffering because we've wanted to prevent animal suffering. And I'm trying to think of the best example, I think, is the farrowing crates for pigs.
Mm.
When I was at vet school, we were told, sow crates were a thing of the past. We'd never see them again. Except, around the time that they're farrowing. Well, hang on, that's surely the existence. Anyway, so farrowing crates, for people who haven't read Sean's book yet, are just what they sound like. They're crates that stop sows from moving around once they've had their piglets. They are kept rigidly, pretty much. They can't turn, they can feed, they can lie to some extent, but they're not allowed to move enough to fall over and lie on the piglets, because about 10% of piglets, it's reckoned, may be killed by the sows lying on them. So great, welfare issue there, solved. We stop the pigs from lying down, they can't fall on the piglets. So we've helped them. But actually the intense suffering of not being able to turn around and look at your piglets and smell them and nuzzle them, gosh, that must be mentally buggering, mustn't it? I've run out of eloquence there. It must be the worst thing in the world for those pigs. But it was done initially to help those poor little, well, it wasn't, was it? It was done to improve piglet production by 10%, because 10% of them being killed. But there was a good end point in theory. Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So kind of recognition of one harm and causing another harm to prevent it. And I think, that could, if you step back to a time where physical health and the physical needs is all that matters. Well, as we say in the book, the warm, the temperature and climatic environment is absolutely spot on for them, optimal. They have the right food and the right quantities, etc., etc. So there's nothing. Then their physical health is, give or take, wanting for nothing. But if we accept and start recognizing that they have this evolutionary legacy and they're similar to their wild ancestors, we know that domesticated sows that have only ever experienced indoor conditions from birth, when released into naturalistic enclosures and monitored and studied, will very, very quickly revert to wild type behavior. It's all up there. And part of that for a sow is wanting to detach from the rest of the group and build a nest shortly before she farrows. And of course, in the outdoor systems, they're able to do that. And you can see videos online if you're not on a farm of them diligently going across and taking mouthfuls of straw and building that nest as they would. So yeah, that is frustrated in a crate, as is the rest of all of the other sort of implications that you described. So then once we know that and we start thinking about it in those terms, it's different, because now we can accept there is a problem for the sow. So absolutely, it was sort of originated in good faith, but it is definitely creating a welfare problem for the sow. And then you think, well, okay, what can we do about it? Well, one of the common blockers is to say not a lot, because if we do it, nobody else will, and we'll just export the problem. We'll import the cheap meat. It just isn't feasible, and so on and so forth. And that's been, again, it's sort of an argument that comes from a place that I understand. But as momentum builds in society for increasing displeasure and discomfort at seeing a sow have to go through that, then the context shifts, the market shifts, and there's this concept of ethical sustainability when we talk about sustainable production, an increasing likelihood that from a negative framing, consumers will reject a product that's come from those systems, or a more positive framing, they will maybe elect to take your product when you don't do that. And that doesn't mean that it all has to be, I suppose importantly, it doesn't have to all then be outdoor production. There's this, again, researching commercial settings to look at indoor free farrowing systems, which have designed pens that use rails and barriers that allow the piglets to get away from the sow. And she, of course, has a bit more freedom than she would. So it doesn't mean that we have to go from one extreme to the other. But that's gaining traction. And as you've seen, there are various supermarkets and brands and others that are making sure they choose sows that have come from those systems.
You steer a very fine line in the book between high welfare standards for animals, but not saying thou shalt not, because at the end of the day, that is food production, and that's what we require as humans is food. I've got two questions for you. One is, do you as a person take that beyond? Do you still eat meat?
I do, yeah. So the book, for people that eat meat, the book promotes a less and better approach, and that's something that I strive to stick to myself.
Yeah,
I have to say, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment, Mike, because I know you've got some interesting things to ask. But at the end of Sean's book, there's the BVA hashtag Choose Assured, and it gives you a very good way of selecting better well-fed meat, if I can call it that.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to say that it's a very balanced book. Sean doesn't preach to his audience. He just goes, this is what's happening, this is how we do it, and this we might want to be aware of X, Y, Z, again, without taking all of the thing from there. But how does a mum of three afford it?
Yeah, and I mean, the timing of publication is tricky, isn't it, on that question, and the cost of living crisis. I do talk about potential government support. So we're seeing government support now in a way that we haven't previously for farm animal welfare standards.
Mm-hmm.
So during my time at BVA, just on the officer team and on council, some of the work that we did that was then linked to that Choose Assured infographic was in the post-Brexit agricultural landscape and evolving policy. We were arguing with others, BVA were, that there should be public money for public goods as part of the new policy, and that public goods should include animal welfare. So you may remember there's a bit of a drive to sort of say, right, we've got this golden opportunity to redesign our agricultural policy, and we want to see more stewardship of the land. So that was really, they were thinking about it in terms of the environment and biodiversity, and creating incentives for more hedgerows and ponds and that sort of thing, which, no surprise from the way I've written, that it all resonates very, very strongly with me. But equally, we didn't want animal welfare as a social concern and an important social issue to slip through the gaps. Maybe it, if the argument could be made persuasively, should also be eligible for some of this money from the public purse. And we won that argument. So, there was lobbying and meetings and all the things that BVA does brilliantly, and the government accepted that should be part of it. So we now have this developing, it's called the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway in England, which BVA and others are now feeding into. But they're looking for the first time, there is public money being allocated to the problem of how can we help farmers move away from farrowing crates. I mean, that's in scope. Some of the problems that I talk about are in scope for this funding. So previously we'd had to, if you're going to increase your cost of production through tackling some of these problems, previously we had pretty much solely appealed to the marketplace, so trying to
if you want to get friendly meat, then you pay more for it. That's what it's come down to in the past, hasn't it?
Yeah.
If you want to get chickens that have had a wonderful or a better life, I don't think any chicken has a wonderful life, but a better life, then you pay 2 or 3 times as much per chicken.
Yeah, although I do try and also make the point that it's not, now this doesn't at all detract from what we said about the cost of living crisis, but it's not always as much more expensive as some people think. I use the example of one of our budget supermarkets in the UK is I think the second leading stockist of RSPCA assured meat, for example. But that notwithstanding, so we'd always been appealing to the informed, concerned citizen, as you say, to pay a little bit more, maybe eat a little bit less, so that kind of balances out, or less meat and dairy. So you eat a bit less, pay a bit more, but nevertheless appealing to the marketplace. But now, for the first time, there's some government funding coming along as well. So that will help. You can still be, because I think it's a mistake to assume that people who can't afford to fund certain standards themselves don't care. In fact, they may feel, it has been suggested, they may feel even worse, that they're as caring as everybody else, and they can't afford it. So
yes,
if the book not only sort of says, well, if you're able to, then you might like to, i.e. eat a bit less, or less meat and dairy and pay a bit more for it, but also you can also be part of just a general societal movement and momentum. I will caveat that also, if you're struggling in life, you don't have the time and energy to campaign as well. So I totally accept that. But not everything that's being suggested costs money, I suppose. And there are vast swathes of society that care, maybe just in ways that they can't easily explore.
I think you're right. I think it is a societal change. It's got to be a move away from the meat and 2 veg every night. My mind is buzzing, Sean, because there are so many different ways we could go. We ramble, as the name suggests, but you're clearly very good at teaching people these things. Your book shows a very good non-didactic teaching style. I don't know whether you've come across any parts of the Veterinary Ramblings show where there is some direct didactic teaching over the course of a minute. Have you?
Yes, I am.
Have you heard of the 60
I've got the
seconds
clock ready.
CCD?
I'm aware of this. Yeah.
Do you have anything that you might want to tell us in 60 seconds?
Yeah, I will caveat that I haven't rehearsed the 60 seconds part, but I know you'll cut me out.
That's
So
fine. That's fine.
That's brilliant. That's fantastic. Okay, so absolutely thrilled, Sean, that you're up for the 60-second CPD challenge. So Sean Wensley on pre-purchase considerations.
Yeah, how to structure a pre-purchase consultation.
How to structure a pre-purchase consultation for somebody who's asking about pet advice, starting now.
Okay, I'd say this consultation could be a game of two halves. It's a golden opportunity to speak to people and help them make the right choice of pets, and then how to look after the pet. So they're thinking about which pet to get. The first part is to think about their lifestyle and circumstances. We structure that around the acronym PETS, P-E-T-S. Is your place suitable for the type of pet that you're thinking about? Would you be able to exercise provide exercise opportunities for the animal that they would need? Would you have the time to commit to their care? And do you have S for spend? Do you have a realistic understanding of what their likely monthly and lifetime costs are going to be? And that'll create a short list. The answers to those questions will create a short list of species and breeds. And then for the chosen breed or species, you would counsel them through the 5 welfare needs for that pet: place, exercise, environment, diet, behaviour, companionship, and health. If you know what all of those are for each pet, you're going to make a good choice.
Wow. How fabulous.
Absolutely fantastic.
That was a
60
deliberate
seconds exactly.
user per second.
I noticed that. It was good.
That was well recovered there, right? with the clock ticking down, nice recovery there. I think it's interesting. I read something earlier on today which was talking about turning an argument, and if you've got the opportunity for a pre-purchase consultation, that person obviously cares, and they've got the interest, and they have the care. And even if it comes down to initially being a slightly conflict situation, if you keep in the back of your mind that person, in order to get into that discussion in the first place, from whatever standpoint they're coming from, they actually care.
Yeah.
And so you can help them very constructively work through things that they may have considered and dismissed, or may not even have considered, to the benefit, of course, of the family and the keeper and the pet that's concerned.
Yeah, and as ever, it's trying to sort of keep away from finger wagging and wanting to just tell them everything to put them off 1,000,001 pets. It's more, we want you to have this amazing new family member as much as you do. Yeah. But if we can just help you see how that breed or that species might be more likely to become such a rewarding member of your family for many years to come, then we're happy to give the advice. And I know there are barriers. People think we're too busy. People think we would charge a lot of money for it. I think they're the two main ones, or they just don't even think to come to that.
And people think we're biased against certain species and breeds, which we are, I guess, but through scientific reasoning. And through matching. I give a couple of examples here. I've been particularly bad over the last couple of years at advising friends and relations on getting pets. And the two occasions I can think of, one with a friend who lives in a flat, he said he wants to get a border collie, and Miles was, no, worst breed to get in a flat. Really. So anyway, he's happy now with his border collie, and he takes it out 5 times a day. And to be honest, it's got him out of the flat. That's worked.
Yeah, but you were right about the tiger. That guy should not have been keeping a tiger.
He shouldn't have been kept. Well, the tiger's okay now. He's gone.
Well, yeah.
But the other one was someone who said, "Look, I want to get a French bulldog. What can you advise?" And I said, "Well, I can advise to try and live your life for a week, just using a snorkel to breathe, but covering up most of the end of the snorkel with a bit of sellotape first, and then see whether you want to get put close bag over your nose, snorkel, cover up the snorkel with sellotape, and then see after a week whether you want to get a bulldog. And they've got a bulldog, and I've operated, and now it can breathe a little bit better. But BOAS, that's a whole new topic for us, and I think
that's a whole show.
We're out of that time tonight. But briefly, your advice on BOAS surgery and dogs, and
well, just say as well. I mean, I think you make a really good point, because again, people are going to. We shouldn't beat ourselves up about our realistic prospects of making sure everyone gets the ideal pet. So they're not walking into that consultation in most cases as just a blank slate waiting to soak up every piece of advice we give them. But if they come in hell-bent on getting a brachycephalic dog, then I've heard anecdotes of people then taking on pet insurance, or pet insurance to a certain level that they hadn't thought to previously. So that, and then they've been able to. I mean, so it really is. It's really not the outcome we were after, clearly, but it's something. And you've maybe then been able to talk about keeping the real importance, or the special importance of keeping them at a healthy weight, not exposing them to the risks of heat stroke, and as you say, recognizing that some of what you think are endearing, quirky, funny noises, characterful noises are really indicative of a serious welfare problem, and that in some cases surgery will be in the animal's best interests to make them happy. So yeah, I guess you can be sort of relaxed about. We shouldn't beat ourselves up if our pre-purchase consultations don't always lead to perfect outcomes, but we can probably generate welfare gains rather than not.
And we, as vets, can let people know that actually we care, and we want, as you say, we want them to have the best experience, and their pet to have the best experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, you've given us at least 60 seconds worth of CPD, Sean. Probably
much more.
Probably more than an hour, actually. Now, I was chatting to some members of the RCVS Council last week, which Julian doesn't know about.
I didn't know about that.
You didn't know about that. Now, we have proudly said and provided all of our listeners with CPD certificates. And I think you've got a CPD certificate for Sean?
I've got one.
Okay, hang on a second. The only thing that we haven't done is we haven't asked a reflection question. So in order to make Veterinary Ramblings fully CPD compliant with the RCVS, which means that any of our veterinary listeners can claim for listening to an hour or an hour and a half of CPD, we need a reflection question. So, Sean, can I ask you, can you give us a reflection question on what we've talked about this evening, please?
Well, I guess it goes, maybe I'm thinking about it again in terms of the professional and the personal. So on a professional note, I might humbly suggest we could reflect on our dual professional responsibility that we've mentioned. So one is the responsibility to the animals under our care that come in, day out, and we all work our socks off to help their owners and those around them. But the broader responsibility is to think about animal use more generally, and how we as vets can, and vet nurses, the veterinary professions, can kind of change the status quo of animal use, and maybe have fewer brachycephalic dogs coming in to the practice in the first place as a result of it. And there are different ways of discharging that broader responsibility. It might be that you join your local veterinary association and start having some of these conversations. Maybe you get involved with the local young vet network, and it's about sort of conversations and activities beyond the practice. Very acutely aware that very many people are stressed and tired and in a very difficult place. So I'm not at all naive that it's easy to do some of that broader activity, but when we can, just to reflect on how we can and if we are. And then back on the personal side, similarly, just to reflect on what I've used in the book, the term an animal welfare footprint. So
yeah, I thought it was a very clever point, actually.
Yeah,
likening that to a carbon footprint.
Maybe just reflect on our choices and how we might be able to, for example, eat less and better meat and dairy, which isn't at all an anti-agriculture message. It's a pro-animal welfare message, and it's hopefully helping value food and value farmers in a way that I think we'd all like to see.
You do say you're not anti-agriculture, and you absolutely are not.
No, you're not.
We're not. I've got many friends who are farmers, and in fact, I get most of my meat from them, and they're farmers who have gone down the organic or the free range or the extensive route, and I would encourage farmers where possible to do that, to get the best welfare and the best price for something that they put a lot of care and attention and love into. But here we go. So you mention, you title your book Through a Vet's Eyes, How We Can All Choose a Better Life for Animals. And so the certificate is Certificate of a Better Life. And this certifies that you can help to improve the lives of animals. So bloody do it. And there's a picture there of a colobus monkey suckling her young, and so that's the best way, I think, of anthropomorphizing and of getting the feel, wrongly or rightly, for animals not only having sentience but having feelings and love. There's some fish. We didn't touch on farmed fish. I thought there's something for another day. The cruelty, the fairness, or whatever of farming fish or even fishing. There's a wonderful, I'm going to bring this up to the screen a bit more. There's a beautiful Gloucester Old Spot pig there at a friend's farm making a nest. And you mentioned farrowing sows. She's making a nest for her piglets and having a great time. Just below that, there's now I believe this is a Sudanese ram. Not what I've seen before, but this was in this country. This was at a zoo, and it was really just to illustrate that over the hundreds and thousands of years we've been keeping sheep, we've kept them for various traits. And you mentioned that in your book, I think more in regard to cattle than to sheep, but the fact that we've gone down very strict breeding regimes to produce types of animals, to produce milk, to produce meat, to produce wool, to produce whatever. And now perhaps we should rethink that and go in for something that's going to produce an all-rounder with less waste, because we don't want to have dairy cattle produced where we have to just kill the male calves, because that's cruel and a waste. And to end on a happy note, there's a picture of a cormorant, and you mentioned the shimmering colour of the feathers of the cormorant. And this was one that I photographed, actually, I think, at Anglesey. And the picture doesn't show it justice. So it looks, to me, it looks like the TVR Tasmin reflective paint. They are, to use a mechanical simile there. Beautiful colouring on a cormorant that you might just look at first and think, it's black. They're shimmering, they're golden, they're purple, they're blue, they're green, they're all colours. But overall, the certificate, I think, hopefully will do justice to the variety of information and joy I got from reading Sean's wonderful book, Through a Vet's Eyes.
Well, it's very, very kind. Thank you, Julian. Are they all your photos?
They're all my photos, yes. I don't want anyone to accuse me of
plagiarism.
Breaking copyrights. They're all mine.
Oh, fabulous. They look really great. Yeah.
So, no, that's brilliant. So, don't forget, you've got your reflection. You've got a reflection question. You can download the certificate off our website, veterinaryramblings.com, and present that to the RCVS as your 1 hour's worth of CPD. That's absolutely brilliant. Can you hold the book up for me again, please, Julian?
No, will do.
Yeah. So
There we go.
this is the book, Through a Vet's Eyes. We've covered a lot of the stuff in here, but we have avoided spoiler alerts. So get yourself down. It's available on Amazon, I think, isn't it? From Octopus Books.
It is, yeah. Just
Yeah.
most online retailers, yeah.
Yeah. So it's out now, available from most online retailers. It's a really good read.
And
Well
at
worth it.
bookshops, you can actually walk into a shop and
Yeah.
buy the book. And
Yeah.
please do that, because you might see all sorts of other books there, and chat to the people behind the counter and ask them if they've read it, and talk to them about what meat they like to eat and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And even actually, you may know, online, there's one of the online retailers is bookshop.org, and they support.
oh yes, we use that. We use that. My daughters get our Christmas present for them this year was a book a month from
Bookshop.org. What are they doing, Sean?
They support independence. So if your preference is to support the independent booksellers, which is great, and bookshop.org will enable you to do that online.
That'd be fantastic. That's lovely. Fabulous. And don't forget to subscribe, because it actually helps. It really does help. Helps us, and it helps spread the word, and helps us get other exciting guests just like Sean on to discuss and just ramble.
Before we stop rambling, can I say a massive thanks, A, for having me on, and B, for reading it. The thought of people reading this piece of work that you pile so much time and effort into is sort of terrifying. So when you say some nice things, it's really, really appreciated. Thank you.
It's worth reading. It's worth reading. Whether I fully agree with all of Sean's comments, whether you agree or not, it's a beautifully written book, and so I'd encourage people to read it. Sean, you've enriched our lives in much the same way as you would have us enriching the lives of all the farm animals and pets. And so what I can say is thank you so much.
May your dog go with you.
May your dog go with you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers. And cut. How was it?
That was splendid for me. Thank you very much. Yeah,
Have you
it was
enjoyed
great.
yourself?
Sorry?
Have you enjoyed yourself?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to, in all honesty, that's that's the first time I've talked in length about it. I mean, I'm not joking. To work on something for such a long time with stops and starts and it being such a private experience.
Mm-hmm.
I know at the moment, because it only got released on Thursday, that people are reading it, which is just, bizarre and terrifying in equal measures. Yeah. And now to talk about it, it's absolutely, I love it.
I'm glad you've enjoyed yourself, because we have as well, Sean. Thank you.
We really have. Thanks for your tonight.